Breaking news, breaking news. This is straight to the truth coming at you. And we have breaking news. P. Diddy, Sean Combs, Puffy, Brother Love, Mule, friend, associate, is being indicted by the FBI. The FBI has brought their first case, their first indictment against P. Diddy's Mule, and the charges are drug trafficking. This is the young man, 25 years old, that was caught on the plane with Diddy and was arrested by the feds for having drugs on him. Let's go in and listen to exactly what is being said and what is going on.
Good morning, Your Honor. Brian Weaver and Alex Diaz on behalf of Mr. Hall. We have filed our written pleadings, state filed information. We have their not guilty plea request filed by the jury, wait for review of information and discovery. The information? Yeah, I think it was filed yesterday.
Yes, Judge. All right, entering a plea of not guilty at this time, send it for a forthright plea and then trial.
5/17/27/78.
Very well, we'll see you on 5/17.
Thank you, Judge.
Client will be here on that,
If, it depends on our discussions with the prosecutor.
Okay,
So if necessary and required, he will be here.
very well. Good day.
Thank you, Judge.
Wayne Graham,
State the posting in person 26. 5/6. Should be requested.
is there any good quality?
Okay, so as you can see, there's indictment by the feds, FBI, who is indicting P. Diddy's Mule for drug trafficking. The plea is that he's pleading is not guilty. They just gave a date for the first date of court. Now we're going to go to where they're bringing the Mule out, and we're going to see exactly what's being said.
His home.
Brand new video just released shows the arrest of P. Diddy's alleged drug mule, who was taken into custody while trying to board the rapper's private jet. We don't hear a word from Brendan Paul, the alleged drug mule, but he doesn't look too happy when he's put in the backseat of a squad car.
Wow, this is really big. This is really big because you're thinking about this huge mogul. Like everyone knows who Puffy is, who Diddy is, who Puff Daddy is, who Sean Combs is. No matter what his name, you know who he is.
Here's everything we know so far about that alleged drug mule, Brendan Paul, and the P. Diddy case so far.
The question that I would have and would I'm curious to see what will happen is that whether they're going to use those charges against Brendan to try to flip him, to try to get him to cooperate against any type of prosecution against Puffy or other.
Right off the bat, let's start by saying no criminal charges have been filed against P. Diddy. You know him as that Diddy, Puff Daddy, Puffy, Sean Combs. He's a rapper, record exec, and producer who's been in the spotlight for decades. And while he doesn't have any charges against him right now, they could be on the way. We say that because two of Diddy's homes, one in Holmby Hills in California and the other on Star Island in Miami, have been raided this week by Homeland Security. We sat down with former homicide prosecutor and trial attorney Bernarda Villalona to make sense of all this.
So there's a lot of bombshells that have been dropped recently, and I think the execution of the search warrant is really what's bringing so much attention to it, because we're no longer talking about civil allegations. Now we're talking about a criminal investigation, which is a completely different ballpark.
Bernarda mentioned those civil lawsuits, and there's been a handful. We first reported one in November of last year when Diddy's ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura filed suit against him. You probably know her as the singer Cassie. So Cassie filed this lawsuit under New York's Adult Survivors Act. That act meant that between November 2022 and November 2023, sexual assault survivors could file civil suits against their alleged predators, regardless of whether the statute of limitations had passed. Cassie's lawsuit dropped several major bombshells, including her claims that Diddy beat her, that he raped her, and also forced her to have sex with prostitutes while recording it on video. Cassie's lawsuit also alleged that Diddy made her carry a gun, which is a theme we saw in a different civil suit, which we'll get to soon. But first, back to Cassie, who settled with Diddy outside of court just one day after the lawsuit was filed. Also in November of last year, accuser Joy Dickerson Neal filed a civil suit against Diddy in Manhattan Supreme Court. Now, according to her lawsuit, Diddy videotaped an assault of Joy back in 1991 when she was a student at Syracuse University. Joy says Diddy drugged her, sexually assaulted her, and then passed around this videotape to other people in the music industry. At the time the lawsuit was filed, Diddy's rep called it a money grab. Things were calm for a few months until February of this year when Rodney Jones, known as Lil Rod, filed a lengthy civil suit against Diddy and several others, accusing the singer of sexual assault and dropping some major bombshells.
That entire filing was just gasp worthy.
That was former prosecutor Melba Pearson, who broke down the filing with us just this week. The suit name dropped several celebrities, from Jennifer Lopez and Prince Harry to Cuba Gooding Jr., who Lil Rod accused of unwanted sexual touching while on Diddy's yacht.
I'm getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have two different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there. And I don't know that Cuba Gooding Jr. is going to escape from that one, because he already saw definitely people moving away from him within Hollywood circles and other circles once those first sexual assault allegations came out. So at this point, I don't think he's going to get away with it a second time.
As for J-Lo, the suit claims that Diddy required her to carry an illegal gun that was used in a 1999 shooting at a New York nightclub. The fact that she is named as somebody who was carrying a weapon, could that be incriminating for Jennifer Lopez?
It can be, but with a huge caveat, right? If I'm not mistaken, that shooting did not result in a death. I know that somebody was harmed, but I don't believe anyone was killed. Because of that, you have the statute of limitations to deal with, which is basically a prolonged amount of a certain amount of time that a prosecutor has to be able to bring charges against someone. And it varies from state to state. But the one thing is consistent is that there is no statute of limitations on murder. So if P. Diddy had actually killed this person, or the person died as a result of their injuries, now J-Lo could be brought into the mix as a co-defendant because of the fact that the person has passed away. But if the person is alive, and maybe they had serious injuries, whatever the case may be, statute of limitations would run, and it is highly likely at this juncture that statute of limitations have expired, therefore she does not have any criminal liability. But the reputational damage might be a different story, because now she's branding herself as something very different than who she was back then. Back then, she was very much Jenny from the block. She was, dating a variety of hip hop artists. She was very much in that world. Now she's married to Ben Affleck. She's trying to, portray herself in a different manner. So now her past is going to come back to haunt her, and we don't know what that's going to mean for her future in terms of movie deals, music deals, or anything like that. So I think for her, it might be more reputational damage than criminal liability.
The same can be said for Prince Harry, who was casually mentioned in the lawsuit. His name only comes up once, and it's almost an afterthought. The court doc reads, quote, Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties, affiliation with, and or sponsorship of Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garnered legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything, but why bring him up?
I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically he being Diddy, was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bringing all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean you know what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the party's being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings. So it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that came out in connection with the Epstein case, that they were close and that they traveled together, and there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage. That would be a different story. But Prince Harry and the way that it was mentioned seemed to be very, again, just sort of trying to bring legitimacy and talk about these were the people that Diddy surrounded himself by to protect himself.
In this specific lawsuit, Lil Rod lists more than 10 plaintiffs, but includes additional names, like that of Brendan Paul, who's listed as Diddy's mule, who allegedly, quote, acquires and distributes Mr. Combs.
Okay, so the guy who the feds just indicted, his name is Brendan Poe. He worked for Diddy, Sean Combs, um, you know, carrying guns, carrying his drugs, just doing all kind of stuff, illegal stuff for Sean Combs. Why somebody would put their self in jeopardy for this man, and now look at what is going on. Um, it's really sad. It's ridiculous. And I'm pretty sure the feds are going after him because they might see him as the weakest link, and they might figure they could, turn him or get him to flip on Diddy. Um, so let's continue to listen in on exactly what is going on here and what some of this means.
Drugs, and guns. On Monday, Paul was reportedly arrested at the airport in Miami while trying to board Diddy's private jet. Florida officers were working with Homeland Security and Customs when they found drugs in his bag. These drugs were tested and the results led to his arrest. He was booked for cocaine and controlled substance possession.
So far, Brendan has only been arrested for possession of a controlled substance, and this is for the narcotics that they recovered, I believe, in one of his bags that was on the airplane where he was stopped in the airport, Miami airport, on Monday. So they haven't linked that to Puffy at all. As of now, it's just for the simple possession, which is still a felony. The question that I would have and would I'm curious to see what will happen is that whether they're going to use those charges against Brendan to try to flip him, to try to get him to cooperate against any type of prosecution
Bet
against
they
Puffy
are.
or others.
All of this means Brendan Paul is facing felonies in Florida and could even face more charges in the future.
I mean, a felony, you can still do jail time. So it's still a serious matter. It's still a serious charge because you can do jail time having to deal with felony possession of narcotics. But just because he just got charged with those two counts, it doesn't mean that in the future he's not going to be charged with several other counts. It all depends where this investigation leads. But again, if I were Puffy, if I were anyone that were associated with Brendan Paul, I would be nervous because it's possible that he can't cooperate in order to avoid any jail time and actually sing on other people.
You talked about him flipping or working with prosecutors, investigators, and giving more details. What would all of that look like behind the scenes?
Ooh, well, it's something that we're not supposed to know about, but given that I used to be a prosecutor for 16 years, when it comes to cooperating, well, number one, he has to be willing to cooperate. And that's going to be a conversation between the prosecutors and his attorneys, and his attorneys will talk to Brendan to see whether that's an avenue they want to take. I mean, personally, depending on how much exposure he has in terms of jail, or how much exposure he has about pending other charges that can come about this entire investigation. It may be a question where he's like, it's not worth it for him to cooperate because he'll be scared of any backlash. He'll be scared of being blacklisted in the industry, and he'll just be scared in general that he'll be known as a person that cooperated against Puffy. But this is a conversation that he needs to have with his attorney, and also for the prosecutors to determine whether they're even willing to offer any type of cooperation deal to Mr. Paul.
Here's what we know about Brendan Paul so far. He's 25 years old and from Ohio. He played guard for Syracuse University's basketball team for 2 years before transferring to Fairmont State University. According to a post on his Facebook, he started making beats on his laptop during the pandemic, which kickstarted his work in the music industry. Eventually, he found Diddy and worked on Diddy's Love album, Off the Grid, that was released last fall. Since his arrest a few days ago, Paul has been released on $2,500 bail. The rest of what we know about Paul comes from Lil Rod's February lawsuit that described him as a direct report of Diddy's chief of staff. That's Christina Quorum, who's also listed as a plaintiff in the lawsuit. As this so-called direct report, Paul would allegedly, quote, be responsible for ensuring payment for sex workers in cash. He also allegedly, quote, directly committed and perpetrated violations of Chapter 77 by aiding, abetting, and inducing the sex trafficking venture and sex trafficking of Plaintiff Jones. So Plaintiff Jones is Lil Rod, who alleges Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced him to have sex with prostitutes. Lil Rod's lawsuit goes on to state that Diddy's associates, including Brendan Paul, would allegedly recruit, entice, coerce, harbor, transport, obtain, and provide Mr. Jones, as well as others, into commercial sex acts through means of force, threats of force, fraud, abusive process, and coercion.
I'm sure that those people that are named in that lawsuit are very nervous right now, very nervous, even more nervous now after the execution of that search warrant, but also nervous because he revealed about these secret recordings, and they're wondering whether they could have been secretly recorded. Are there recordings of them engaging in these type of activities? Because even though it may not be criminal, some of those activities, it still does tarnish their image, so they can still take a toll in terms of their branding. But in terms of the lawsuit itself, it's very damaging. You got to think that several companies have already distanced themselves from Puffy, and there haven't been any criminal charges. All you see is a civil lawsuit. So I think there's still going to be more things that are going to come about as a result of that civil lawsuit. But I think the most damaging, again, is Cassie's lawsuit. But more importantly, I think is Lil Rod's lawsuit that was filed.
And in this civil lawsuit, Lil Rod specifically, that Brendan Paul is listed almost 20 times, it's alleged that he's a drug mule. So he's getting different kinds of drugs for P. Diddy. He's also procuring prostitutes or sex workers. So if this is eventually investigated and prosecutors determine that there's enough to charge him, what sort of charges would he
to manage to try to be proactive in trying to avoid charges being brought against their client, or to try to minimize their exposure. But I think they should be preparing that there may be called in at least for questioning or to be interviewed by law enforcement. So they should be preparing for that.
Is it possible that we could also hear from other associates who knew Diddy very well and have seen some of these interactions?
Absolutely. You got to think with law enforcement, the U.S. Attorney's Office, even with the District Attorney's Office, that they can issue subpoenas, and issuing subpoenas to these people will require them to appear either before a grand jury or before a court, to appear to be interviewed. That doesn't mean that they will appear. It doesn't mean that when they do appear, they'll be giving information, but at least that they'll be required to appear. So what would be interesting is whether, if there's a grand jury presentation, is whether any of these individuals will be required to appear before the grand jury to give any type of testimony. But again, the most important part of what they should do is to get a defense attorney to be able to guide them through this process, because you don't want to give conflicted information to a U.S. Attorney's Office or to law enforcement and later on be prosecuted for giving that misinformation.
But without any current charges, Diddy is free to do what he pleases, and that includes leaving the country. And we know that when Brendan Paul was being arrested, it was as he was boarding P. Diddy's private jet. They were planning to fly away, go wherever. Is it possible, because Diddy hasn't faced any charges or anything, that he could just leave the country?
Absolutely. There's nothing holding him here. He hasn't been arrested. His passport hasn't been taken. So he's free to leave the country. He can leave the continent. He can do what he wants because there is no criminal arrest. If there's an arrest, then the judge will set certain parameters as to where and when he can travel, and if he can travel, whether he needs to get permission from the court. But for now, he's free to leave as he wishes.
In the end, it's likely the lawsuits against Diddy that led to his homes being searched in the first place. And we've talked about these civil lawsuits, now potential criminal charges against him. Is it possible that this criminal investigation wouldn't have even started had it not been for these several civil lawsuits against P. Diddy?
Absolutely. And I think the one that really triggered it was the lawsuit by Cassie back in November of 2023, because there are several bombshell allegations about sex trafficking inside of that lawsuit. Of course, that's a civil lawsuit. Those are only allegations, and ultimately ended up settling the very next day. However, even though it's just civil allegations, I think it led to setting up the frame for law enforcement to actually look more into it. Let's just remember, when we think about R. Kelly, what spurred the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the FEDS to get involved? It was the documentary Surviving R. Kelly that spurred that investigation. Here we have something similar, and it's the civil lawsuits, that being with Cassie, possibly about the other females, the 3 other lawsuits, but I don't think it were those lawsuits. I think primarily it's the one with Cassie and the one that was filed by the Mail just last month, because the one with the Mail specifically states that there are video recordings and there are photographs of alleged criminal activity. And I think that was enough for the Department of Justice, for the U.S. Attorney's Office, for the feds to get involved and look into it further.
What sort of information or evidence would they be looking for in this investigation?
Well, I think the main piece of evidence that they're looking for is video recordings or cell phones or anything having to deal with cameras, because from the civil lawsuits that have been filed, specifically the one that was filed by the Mail just in February, he states that there are video recordings and that Puffy had secret cameras that were located in the different rooms inside of the home. So by law enforcement recovering those video cameras, recovering laptops, recovering cell phones, they're able to investigate and do a forensic investigation into those electronic devices and try to get additional evidence as to a crime that has taken place, which will be able to move along any criminal investigation towards possible charges.
And because we don't have that affidavit, we're still not sure whether Diddy himself is who federal investigators are after.
And just because there was a search warrant that was executed at his own, again, doesn't mean that he was a target of the search warrant. But of course, by just the reasonable inferences that you can make that he is the target of the search warrant, it could take some time. Because number one, if they did take any electronic devices from his home or from his person, they have to be able to conduct a forensic examination from those devices. And it will depend, are there passcodes? Are they able to break those passcodes and get through those devices in order to get that information? And then what is in those electronic devices? Is there anything that's incriminating in those criminal devices that can be used against them? Because again, it's not about making an arrest, especially when you're talking about Puff Daddy, Sean Diddy Combs. You want to make sure that if he is arrested and he is prosecuted, that you can prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. So you want to make the best and strongest case possible in the very beginning before you make an arrest. So to be honest, it can be any day or it can be months from now, or nothing can happen. They can say we don't have enough credible evidence to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and leave it at that. Because again, a civil lawsuit is completely different than a criminal prosecution. Civil lawsuit, the burden is more likely than not, as opposed to a criminal prosecution, you have to be able to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
So there you have it. Nothing may come out of the raid and the feds going after P. Diddy, but we don't know. Something might. We just got to sit back and wait and see what's going to happen. But for starters, an indictment has been brought down on P. Diddy's mule friend for drug trafficking. All right, y'all have a good day. I'm going to end this video right here, and look forward to more videos being put out. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow, and hit the bell up above. So when I post a video, you'll be the first to know. And as information comes out about P. Diddy and his mule's case, I'll be most definitely keeping you guys up to date. Y'all have a good day. And remember, keep peace in your life.